She was never supposed to speak this language, and now Spain can't stop crying over Eala. A 21-year-old girl from Manila walked onto a tennis court in the heart of the country that once ruled her homeland for over 300 years, and she did something nobody in that stadium was prepared for. She opened her mouth, and out came the language of the very empire that colonized her ancestors, spoken so fluently, so warmly, that grown adults in that crowd felt their eyes well up. If you think this is just another tennis story, stay with me, because by the end of this video you will understand why people are calling this the most emotional 5 minutes women's tennis has produced all year. But here's the part almost nobody is talking about. On that exact same day, in that exact same city, the reigning Wimbledon champion tried to do the exact same thing, and she couldn't get past ordering 2 sandwiches before she gave up and switched back to English. 2 players. Same stadium. Same language. One walked away being called a queen. The other walked away laughing at herself. Stick around, because what happens later in this story, a message from a tennis legend, a heartbreak on Wimbledon's center court, and a comeback that just happened days ago, is even bigger than the moment that made her go viral. Before we go further, I need you to understand something. This channel exists because people like you refuse to look away from a story the big networks were sleeping on. When nobody outside the Philippines knew her name, this community already believed. If you're someone who wants to feel like you discovered greatness before the world caught up to it, hit subscribe right now, because I promise you, what I'm about to tell you next will make you glad you did. Let's go back to the moment that started all of this. It was April 2026. The Madrid Open. Clay courts, golden afternoon light, a stadium full of Spanish fans who came expecting nothing more than an ordinary first-round match. Alexandra Eala walked out to face Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova, a former Wimbledon quarter-finalist, a Grand Slam finalist, a Russian veteran who has spent more time on center courts than most players will ever accumulate in a career. Eala didn't just beat her. She dismantled her, 6-3, 6-3. No wobble. No mercy. That win alone should have been the headline. Instead, it was only the setup. When the on-court host handed Eala the microphone, she started in English, the way every player does. "I love Madrid," she said, "it's an amazing tournament. Polite. Expected." And then, without warning, she switched. She looked out at that Spanish crowd and told them, in their own language, that every time she comes back to Madrid, she feels at home. The stadium reacted like nobody expected. Because here's what almost nobody watching understood in that moment: Spanish was once the official language of the Philippines for over 3 centuries. It disappeared from Filipino classrooms in 1987. Most Filipinos today cannot speak a word of it. So when a 21-year-old Filipina stood in the birthplace of that empire and spoke its language fluently, without hesitation, without an accent that begged for patience, she wasn't performing. She was reclaiming something her country was cut off from generations ago. And then, on the very same day, in the very same tournament, something happened that made the moment even bigger. Iga Swiatek, world number 4, 6-time Grand Slam champion, the most dominant claycourt player of her generation, also tried her Spanish after her own win. She got through a greeting. She admitted she'd been experimenting with the language in social settings that week. And then she hit a wall. "Okay, that's all I know," she said, laughing, "so let's please switch to English." The WTA itself noticed the contrast. The tour's official website ran a story with a headline that quietly said everything: Swiatek, Eala flex their Spanish skills after Madrid wins. Read that again. The governing body of women's tennis put a Filipina's fluency in the same sentence as a world number 4's effort, and let the difference speak for itself. Eala has spent nearly 8 years in Spain training at the Rafa Nadal Academy, and it shows. She carries a fluency Swiatek is still chasing. But I promised you this story gets bigger. Because 3 months before that Madrid afternoon, something happened that changed everything about who Eala was to the tennis world. Rewind to July 4, 2026. Wimbledon. Center court. The defending champion, Iga Swiatek, walked in as the favorite. Eala was ranked outside the top 30. Nobody expected a contest. What they got was a war. Eala stunned the defending champion Swiatek through a superb 7-6, 9, 6-2 victory, booking her place in the round of 16, moving their head-to-head to 2-1 in her favor. 2 hours and 15 minutes of tennis that ended with a 21-year-old Filipina doing something no player from her country had ever done in the history of Grand Slam tennis. She had beaten the defending Wimbledon champion, on grass, on center court, in front of the entire tennis world. And she wasn't done being humble about it. "I don't know how to describe it," she said afterward. "Iga is a phenomenal player and a really nice person. I'm really grateful to be able to share center court with her at Wimbledon." 2 days later, her run ended. Jasmine Paolini beat her in a gritty 3-set battle, 6-4, 4-6, 6-3, on center court, ending the deepest Grand Slam run of Eala's young career. It hurt. It had to hurt. But watch what she did next, because this is where most young athletes crumble, and she didn't. She said almost nothing publicly. No excuses, no soundbites chasing sympathy. She went back to work. Now here's a name you need to remember, because it explains everything about how a girl from Quezon City ended up speaking flawless Spanish on a stage built by a Spanish empire. Toni Nadal. The man who personally coached his nephew Rafael Nadal to 22 Grand Slam titles. The architect behind arguably the greatest career in the history of Spanish tennis. Eala joined his academy in Mallorca when she was just 12 years old, and Uncle Tony has watched her grow up on those clay courts ever since. He hasn't been quiet about what he sees in her. After her breakout run at the Miami Open, he told the Spanish outlet Marca that her presence at the academy is a huge success, calling her the player who has been with them the longest, without a single complaint from her or her family in all that time. He's called her a player who could be among the best in the world. And Eala herself has returned that respect, again and again, in her own words. Ahead of this year's clay season, after training under him in Mallorca, she said something that mirrors the exact sentiment she gave that Madrid crowd. "We're so blessed to have Toni as part of the team," she said. "If you had told me that years ago, my mind would have been blown." Think about that for a second. The man who shaped the greatest Spanish tennis career in history is now shaping a Filipina's career. And she answers him, and an entire Spanish-speaking crowd, in his own language. Now think about what that actually means commercially, because this is the part the marketing world is only just beginning to understand. English opens doors in America and Australia. Filipino connects her to over 100 million people at home and a global diaspora spread across every continent on Earth. And Spanish, real, fluent, unforced Spanish, opens Spain, opens all of Latin America, opens the massive Spanish-speaking crowds that fill stadiums from Miami to Indian Wells. She isn't one athlete with one fan base. She's 3 fan bases stacked into a single player, and Madrid was the afternoon the people doing the math finally had to pay attention. But I told you this story wasn't finished. And what happened just 2 days ago might be the biggest twist of all. On July 27, Eala opened her North American hardcourt swing at the Mubadala DC Open in Washington. Her opponent, Zheng Qinwen, the reigning Olympic gold medalist, a former world number 4, one of the most dangerous hardcourt players on the entire tour. Eala dropped the first set 4-6. Down a set and a break, in front of a Washington crowd already buzzing with what fans were calling Eala mania, she did something that has become her signature. She fought back. She rallied from a set down to win 4-6, 6-4, 6-1 over Qinwen Zheng of China, in a match where the crowd's energy carried her through every break point. Afterward, she said something that tells you exactly why this keeps happening to her, over and over, on every surface, in every language. "I think I've already had that comeback mindset in me," she said. "I've had more experience now to implement that mindset at the higher level." That win pushed her career record against elite competition even further, and it set up her very next match, a round of 16 showdown against Leylah Fernandez, the defending Washington champion, a Filipino-Canadian herself, which means this next match carries a weight that goes far beyond the scoreline. Two players with Filipino roots, one trophy on the line, and a fan base on two continents about to hold its breath. I'm not going to tell you how that match ends, because as of right now, it hasn't been played yet. What I will tell you is this: the same girl who stood in a Madrid stadium and told a crowd her goal was simply not to be afraid to speak their language is now 3 matches from potentially the biggest hardcourt result of her career, against a player who shares her heritage. If you want to know how that match goes, and what happens the moment she steps back onto a Grand Slam court after her Wimbledon heartbreak, that's the story I'm telling next, and I promise you it will not disappoint. So here's what I want you to sit with. 3 centuries ago, Spanish was forced onto the Philippines by an empire that took everything it wanted and gave almost nothing back. It vanished from Filipino classrooms in 1987. An entire generation grew up disconnected from a language that was once theirs by force, then taken away by history. And somehow, a 21-year-old girl from Quezon City picked it back up, not because anyone told her to, but because she spent 8 years training in the country that once colonized hers, and instead of resenting it, she made it feel like a second home. Then she stood in the middle of that empire's capital and gave it back to them, fluently, warmly, on her own terms. That is not just a tennis story. That is a young woman rewriting what her country was told it lost. So here's the question I want you to answer in the comments before you go anywhere. When Eala one day lifts her first Grand Slam trophy and steps up to give that winner's speech, which language does she start in? English, the language of the tour that made her famous? Filipino, the language of the country that raised her? Or Spanish, the language she chose to reclaim in the heart of the empire that once tried to erase it? If you've been here since the Miami quarterfinal, since the Wimbledon upset, since the Madrid moment that most of the world still doesn't fully understand, you already know the answer means something bigger than tennis. Subscribe now, because the next chapter of this story is already unfolding in Washington, and I am not going to let you find out about it after everyone else already has.